Good evening, one and all. Happy International Women's Day +1. I think we can still be channeling the spirit from yesterday. It's terrific to have this opportunity to have our Changemakers event. And I'm going to introduce you very shortly to our wonderful changemaker who is going to be presenting her research, Florence Sichet. But before I do, I want to tell you a little bit about the Changemakers program. Here at the Global Institute for Women's Leadership at the King's Business School and working with the Faculty of Social Sciences and the African Leadership Centre, we are very proud of the Changemakers program, which aims to empower advocates and activists dedicated to gender equality by providing tailored support for research projects tied to their work or local communities. Basically, we bring activists from the forefront whose work will be enhanced by having the time to reflect and to research, supported by our academic environment. So when they go back out there are new ideas and new innovations. We think all of this plays a real role in fostering genuine societal change and helps bridge the gap between academic research and real-world impact. And one of the things we were very clear about when we formed the Global Institute for Women's Leadership several years ago is that we didn't want it to be an academic research institute in the heart of a university that no one could ever find or no one except other academics ever hear from. We wanted it to be a research institute that linked out into the world and took research into impact. And the Changemakers program is a fantastic example of that. I'd very much want to thank Aleda, who is at the back there, who has done so much to make all of this work possible, and has clearly brought her fan club, of which I am a paid-up member. But now let me introduce you to this event's changemaker, to Florence Sichet, who is a gender justice advocate, a media practitioner and civil society leader based in Sierra Leone. Florence has extensive experience in women's rights, sexual and reproductive health and rights, and community-led advocacy. She is the Executive Director of Media Matters for Women, Sierra Leone, a national non-government organisation recognised by UNESCO and UN Women for its innovative use of media and information to address gender inequality and amplify the voices of women and girls in rural and marginalised communities. Florence has been working hard on the research that you can see presented on your seats, and she is going to familiarise us with that research now. Florence, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julia. And I want to wish everybody here happy International Women's Day. We start with a very high spirit that there is so much opportunities despite the challenges. And I want to really thank the Changemakers program. It has really helped in terms of bringing grassroots voices to the academia space and to share real impact and real life stories. So I'll first of all start with the presentation, and the topic looks at barriers and opportunities, women's political leadership in Sierra Leone. Why this study? This study looks at women's participation in politics, looking at Sierra Leone with over half of the population which are women. Despite that population, do women have the real political representation which still remains structurally unequal? And by that, we are still, despite efforts being made with a 30% quota system, there's still gaps in terms of implementation and when it comes to, monitoring and ensuring that it cuts across leadership role, not only into elected seats, but also into the entire governance structure from local level to the executive. And when you look at the study was conducted into 3 key areas: Bombali, which is the northern area, and Kenema, which is the south, and in Freetown. Bombali is a high patriarchal system in that community, the northern part, wherein women are seen as not, they should not take part in leadership roles. In fact, in Bombali, the northern part, you have very little women who are elected or nominated as chiefs. It's not, in fact, there. But when you go to the southeast, you have women chiefs. You have women who are participating at local level. But when it comes to the parliamentary level, parliamentary seats, we have only 1 female parliamentary parliamentarian as a woman chief. That tells you a lot how culture and tradition shapes the way women are, provided space in our political system. But despite all of these challenges, we had a huge leap when the Act on Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment was implemented in 2022, wherein we saw a huge leap with women representative in parliament. But despite all of that, we still have challenges because the bill provides where women should have 30% when it comes to positions within the civil, the job space, and also in terms of local representation. There is a huge challenge, especially with local representation, because local representation helps in terms of seating women in representing at that level, which helps to go to the higher level. And we also looked at, structural barriers. What are these issues? How could these issues be expanded into? And this is about moving from focus on symbolic representation to real power. As I said, women should be seen in active spaces when it comes to real power. The methodology used in this study is the qualitative exploratory design, wherein 30 in-depth interviews with female politicians, 8 aspiring women leaders, community-based, civil society, NGOs, traditional communities, and policymakers. We really had very interesting feedbacks from these interviews. And when you look at this component, you really, it looks into the different areas, even having the perspective from women who are being elected, those who've vied for position but were not successful, and also women who have been in politics with the real issues. And I wish we had, the mayor of Freetown was here, and she has a lot of experience, and we would have loved to hear from her. And we had focus group discussion. Some of the focus group discussion really helped me to understand that it was more than a study. It was a space for women to speak about the real issues that are affecting them, especially when it comes to tradition and culture, how it has limited women. And also we looked into, I said earlier, Kenema, Bombali, Freetown, with thematic analysis across 5 core areas. The areas looked into structural barriers to women's political participation include media narratives. I will take a quote from one of the women we interviewed who said, "Many women are afraid to participate in politics because of how the media shapes and informs, the public. And they are very shy. Some women, they feel like speaking on the radio or vying for politics will just come with a whole new narrative that will attack their character, that will attack, their perception, or they feel so powerless. So I think there is an opportunity there also, despite the challenges, there is an opportunity on how the media can really work with these women in terms of shaping, in terms of also sharing their stories. Violence and intimidation cuts across not only in Sierra Leone. The study also looked into how other women in other African countries have really been exposed to violence just because they choose to take the path of politics. And also we look into policy effectiveness and accountability. As I said, the GIWL is a very, we've seen how the Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment Act have really scaled up the participation or the seats given to women in parliament. But how could we hold the bill accountable so that it doesn't only stop at that level? It also comes from down, which is the chieftaincy, the local level, and then it flows up, even to job opportunities. How could we ensure that this policy is effective and efficient and also create change? Because we want to see a policy which is not only there, to show the figures, but we want to see a policy that drives the change. And resilience. Interestingly, despite all of these challenges, the women still believe their voices are powerful. We have the numbers, we have the women, we have the networks. How can we continuously create that movement, continuously move with the speed, so that despite all of these challenges, women are still resilient? Media violence and political risk. Harsher scrutiny for women. We've seen that certain issues that happen with a woman who vies or who is in politics, women have seen the way the media have really, scrutinized them. And now with the new media, you have online bullying. So many women, despite we are celebrating International Women's Day, we have so many women back in Sierra Leone. I was just talking to my colleague, and it's such a very difficult moment for women. And intimidation and safety concerns. One of the women I interviewed said, the way symbols are given to women put so many women at risk, and it really discourages women to continue to be in politics. You are given a symbol in the opposition stronghold, which is not your party's stronghold. You're not being protected. You cannot even hang your poster. You cannot even campaign and feel very safe. So many women have also been, censored through tradition and culture. They use the porous society. It's a very powerful male society. When that sound of the porous society is being played or being heard, every woman should just take cover. You are not even protected, not by the police, not by any authority, because they are a powerful group of men who think their society is there to limit women. And that cuts across from the northern region to the southern region. The power society is used, to silence women. And when you talk about self-censorship and political withdrawal, we've seen a lot of how this has affected so many women, and it has discouraged so many women. But despite all of that, women really feel like, the self-censorship and also political censorship have silenced so many women. They're afraid using political instruments such as the police. They come up with a bill called the cyber law, and they use that bill against you, and that has discouraged women to continue in being in the space. Despite GIWL Act introduced the 30% quota, implementation and the enforcement gap still remains really an issue. And through the customary norms undermine formal protection. Representation does not always equal to influence. Despite the numbers, how has the numbers really influenced change? These are all some of the issues discovered through this report. Women still have, there is hope. With the work we do at Media Matters for Women, we build women networks, we build movements, we ensure that, women create a space where they share their voices. I will share a little story. During the 16 days of activism, we went to a community and we had the under the tree conversation. And this chief was seated there with his council members, all male. And then this bold woman, who was one of our awardees, local awardees, was very brave to challenge the chief of issues that are affecting not only her, but all of our other colleagues. So they were just coming whispering, hello. And then she will challenge the chief. The other one will come and explain, and then she will challenge the chief. So I was so confused and in a very difficult situation. And then I asked the chief, how many council members do you have? And he called, do you have any woman? He said, no. Don't you think it would be wise to choose one of those women to support you in that? And he said, that is brilliant. So that was how, that shift came in. And then she became the woman, first woman to be in the council. And she has been a very influential and powerful voice. It's all about opening the space, engaging the men for them to understand women are also partners when it comes to governance and politics and leadership role. Community legitimacy and social trust. These networks should be strengthened, and these networks should be capacitated, and we should also have a mentorship way wherein we mentor other women, especially at grassroots level. And also youth engagement and civic mobilization. I think there is a very powerful community when we talk about youth. Young people and technology, using technology, can also use that space when it comes to, sharing their views, and also when it comes to civic space. Well, the report also looked at strategic recommendations, which are not coming from me, but coming from the women themselves, in terms of strengthening and ensuring that the GIWL is not only focused on women who are vying for top political positions, but also within their political party. There is a lot of decisions being made, and it shapes the participation of women at that level of political governance within their party. Investment in district level leadership. There should be a lot of investment in there where women can also be in leadership roles within district level. And creation of safe political participation. Women should feel free to participate in politics at all levels, even within this chieftaincy level. Women should be given that opportunity so they can participate at that level. And supporting gender responsive campaigns and finance. We all know it is really important so that women can have access to funds and ensure that they can support their campaigns and participate fully when it comes to politics. Why the investments now? It is really important. I guess we are all aware of the trend globally. Some people are investing, some people are investing in guns, economic issues, and now we have these threats now on investment in women. Do we continuously ignore the women whilst growing grassroots legitimacy of women leaders still remains, a threat? Youth and digital organizing expanding. We have to ensure that digitalization is provided within, across the countries, across the communities, wherein youth can share their voices, can use innovation to share their stories. High returns of democratic stability and inclusion. It is really very key to ensure that we have, the democratic process is open, fair, and free. I will close by reflecting on these issues. Women's political participation is not a capacity issue. It is a question of power, protection, and resources. If we inclusive democracy requires structural transformation. Let our political parties be more honest to ensure that women are not only mobilizers in terms of bringing the people, cooking with the big pots, but also taking decisions at key areas. I would really want to thank the entire program of the Women's Global Institute, and to also thank you all for coming and listening, and also want to thank the Changemakers program. It has really made me to understand that as an activist, sometimes we sit and think on how can we design a program? What kind of program? But having this study made me realize that these women have their own agenda. They understand the issues and they are ready for a change. And I really want to thank my dearest Alida. She has been so patient with me. When an activist speaks, it's so different when an academic speaks. But she has been so patient. She has been there. And she always, had my back despite all of the challenges. And to my colleagues from Media Matters for Women, I cannot keep going without thanking you guys. You've been a push, a support, a sisterhood, and that tells me how important it is to work together. And to the women, I will last say this, of Sierra Leone, thank you for giving me the opportunity and the experience to share. I remember starting as a young journalist, I walked into a room filled with men who were editors, who shaped the news, who shaped the narrative. And one of my colleagues here told me, Florence, you can start by doing the women's program. And that was a kickstart for me to learn a lot. And instead of me waiting for me to be invited in the room, I had my chair, I became the carpenter, I created my space, and today I'm happy to share all of these experiences. I thank you very much.
Well, Florence, thank you so much for doing all of the research and for that incredible presentation. We're going to dig into that in this panel discussion now, and we'll also have the opportunity for audience questions. I'd have to say, during my political career, not every thought that I had about journalists was a charitable one. I've got to be truthful about that. But I know journalism is. You've just talked about how you started in journalism, and this work that you've gone on to do is truly transformative. So thank you very much. Let me introduce my other panel colleague, Katharina. Katharina is Australian, so by definition we all know each other. I mean, there's less than 30 million of us, so it's quite an easy task to all know each other. But let me just more formally introduce her. Katharina is a feminist leader, a humanitarian lawyer. She's had a career in gender equality that's gone from advocating for refugee women with UNHCR through to breakthrough efforts to tackle sexual exploitation and strengthen accountability in humanitarian settings. I'm going to talk to her about what she's doing now on supporting women's rights activists with funding and organisational strength. You also may have seen some of her contributions on accountable aid, and we're going to talk a little bit about that too. So I'm going to go to Katharina first and let Florence just decompress from doing her presentation. But before I do so, I should also acknowledge that this program would not have been possible without the support of the Oak Foundation, and I did want to record our true gratitude for that financial support. It has made possible everything with Florence and making sure that this program can run. So thank you to the Oak Foundation. Katharina, one of the things that Florence referred to at the end of her presentation was the choices we can make about where we invest and who we invest in, and whether or not we invest in women and girls. And really your current work with the Helia Collaborative is focused right on that, on resourcing frontline women's rights advocates. Can you tell us what that looks like in practice? What does feminist funding really mean, and what difference does it make for local women?
Great, thank you. Have you ever had that happen where someone introduces you and you think, who is that? So here I am being that person. So I just want to give you a little bit of context, because my career's focused most recently on a very particular slice of philanthropy, and that is funding women's rights and social justice. And we are in a very particular moment, and Florence referred to that, with quite drastic reduction in funding, a real retraction. I had a look at the stats this morning, and in the last 4 years, there's been a reduction to the aid and development world of around about 40%. That's bilateral and philanthropy together. But when you look at women's rights funding, it grows up to 66%. We're looking at a 66% reduction in access to funding for the exact kind of important critical work that Florence is doing. So that's the kind of context that I'm going to speak from. So when we talk about funding women's leadership, I think we have to also think about how is that funding shifting power into the hands of those women leaders. So traditionally, feminist funding has really talked about three things. Core funding, that means fund the organisation and not projects. You have to fund the whole thing and trust the strategy of the whole organisation. Secondly, long-term funding. Florence has been doing this work for a really long time. She talked about the moment she pulled her chair to the table. That's many years in the making. I was with the really wonderful Sharon Beilinger, who was a co-founder of Media Matters for Women many, many years ago. And this is a long-term project. And without long-term funding, we don't change anything. So core funding, long-term, and flexible. We have to be able to trust the women like Florence who lead these organisations to be able to shift strategies to meet the moment, because things are changing. Even this morning, we don't have one panellist here because she has to deal with a political crisis. So we have to be able to have organisations that can move to the money to where it's needed in the moment. But I'd like to push us as feminists a little bit further than those three things that have been the traditional mantra, with 5 more. Can you bear with me for 5? Okay.
We can do.
Right. So one really important, Florence spoke about it, reach the front lines. Fund, as Florence calls it, the last mile. How do we get money into the hands of those organisations that really do work at the front lines? Now, the easiest thing for a funder is to pick those big, well-known international organisations who I love and who play a really important role and can sometimes be the gatekeepers. We have to find ways to leapfrog that so that the money gets into the hands of the women doing the work. There are mechanisms for that, and lots of times I think funders and resource allies aren't really aware of those. Things like women's funds. I don't know, do you know what women's funds are? They're organisations locally or regionally who are fundraisers and who have the means of getting money to places that most donors think it's not possible. There's a Ukrainian Women's Fund, there's the Doria Middle East Women's Fund, there's the Democratic Republic of Congo. So all those places where we would think, oh gosh, we can't get money there, there are actually mechanisms for that because women have thought of it, right? So that's the first thing, get the money to the front lines. Second thing is fund the ecosystem. So by that I mean, yes, absolutely fund Media Matters for Women, but also fund the organisations around her that are the scaffolding for the work she's going to do. So if I may, I'd like to give you an example of that from Moldova, so other side of the world, but many years ago I was working for a philanthropic organisation, Oak actually, and we had one organisation we were funding in Moldova to provide shelters for women fleeing male violence in the home. But one shelter is not going to change a system designed to harm women. So we asked them, what else do you need? And over a period of time, we funded legal organisations for legal advocacy and providing legal support to survivors. We funded health work. We funded youth work. We funded working with men and boys. We funded leadership for women, not quite as sophisticated as this, but nevertheless. And all those things together over a long period of over a decade led to us also funding the connectivity. Last week, you facilitated a wonderful panel with Caitlin Moran and Kelly
Beaver from
Thank
Ipsos
you.
Mori, yes.
Yes, from Kelly Beaver. And Caitlin pointed out women's superpower is connection. We do that really, really well. So we decided we'd fund that in Moldova as well, fund the time and the space for all those organisations to get together and work together. And over that decade, they were able to enable that the government ratified the Istanbul Convention on Ending Violence and Domestic Violence. I think you know that one. Creating its blueprints for the government to adopt on actually how they would then implement the convention. They created the largest regional conference on ending violence against women. Don't forget their neighbours are Ukraine, so that's a very big piece of work. They were able to build up 2 women leaders from those organisations to become parliamentarians. And when the Ukraine war happened, all of them collectively went to the front line to assist the women and families crossing the border. That was because they were able to work together, and that scaffolding created an ability to make drastic change. And I looked this morning, and according to WHO, in that 10-year period, the acceptance of domestic violence across adults, men and women, has shrunk from about 35 to 40% down to closer to 11. So it's an attribution-contribution situation, but nevertheless, that collective work created really dramatic change. So fund the front lines, fund the ecosystems, and then I think that the third thing is really about shifting who makes the decisions about funding. And Florence talked about that exactly. How do we make sure that the decisions about who gets the funding are closer to where the work happens? And there are lots of ways of being able to do that, but I think that we often think that they're too complicated, or we want to keep control. We were talking about control at our afternoon tea before. So how do we make sure that local women leaders are going to be part of the advisory councils that make those decisions? How do we make sure that they're co-designing the criteria for who's going to get that money? And so overall, I think our role as funders should be about resourcing and not directing. And that's a very difficult space for funders often to get into. The fourth thing, which I think is really important, and people who know me, I've got colleagues watching and they're going to laugh, is how do we rethink accountability and shift it from that way to this way and both directions? So I am really not a fan of monitoring and evaluation. People are all going to go, ooh! But what I really mean is I think that is a very policing and controlling way to understand funding. What I think we should be talking more about is learning, communicating what we've learned, and celebrating. Again, at your wonderful panel last week, there was a great lady who, I couldn't see her because I was online, but she stood up and said, I'm a boomer. And lots of the great things have happened and changed since, when I was young. We're really rubbish at celebrating what has changed. We can barely talk about it, and yet over the years we do know that change happens. And as part of that alternative MEL mechanism, how do we shift accountability and understand it differently so that funders can be accountable to movements and to organisations, not just the other way around? So is it possible for a woman leader like Florence to have a real channel to critique donors? Is she able to say, that's a really unreasonable demand? Did you know that in a medium-size women's organisation, they can spend between 20 and 40% of their work time reporting to donors? Florence is trying to stop FGM in Sierra Leone. Does she really have 20% a day a week to report to a donor? That's absurd, and we have to be able to change that. And really the fifth thing is about risk, and it's really important how we understand, how funders understand risk. I want to tell you a very quick story about a friend and colleague called Yanar Mohammed. She created an organisation called the Organisation for Women's Freedom in Iraq. So, I'm going to get a bit upset. But anyway, she created an organisation to build shelters. You know her? Yeah. To build shelters for women fleeing violence in the family. And this really upset the Iraqi government, who have spent a lot of time threatening her. And last Monday, she was assassinated on the front garden of her home, having gone back to Iraq from her other home in Canada to prepare for International Women's Day. The risks to frontline activists are very real. And as funders, we have to find a way to make sure that we can't stand in front of Yanars of the world and help protect them physically, but we should be able to take the financial risks that they would otherwise have to bear as well. So when we do all of this together, what I hope and what I see is that power shifts because money is no longer a tool to discipline local women leaders, but rather it becomes a fuel for their political agendas and their dreams.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to get a conversation going now. Florence, I'm going to give you the space to respond to anything that Katharina said that you want to respond to. But I also wanted to pull one thread out of what you spoke about. So you spoke about the degree of change to date, how we need to see more change. And I wanted to get a sense of, you know, how optimistic you are that we will see that more change in a 5 to 10 year period. As I think we all know, in the world that we live in, things can go forward and we can see more change. Sometimes things can go backwards too. But do you think there's enough forward momentum now on women's leadership for it to, you know, compound and then be more and more sustained over time? But anything you want to say on the funding side too?
Thank you very much, Katharina. I can resonate to some of the 5 points that you made. And one of them is the risk, you know, talking about frontliners. Sometimes we are so connected with the real life stories that these women go through, and we put so much energy. We yearn for change. We want to see results. We want to see how we could, you know, walk along with these women so they could have justice. And then because of the so many issues in terms of accessing service, especially in the country where I come from, you know, where gender-based violence is an issue, the issue of FGM is another political issue. And so during that process, so many of us sometimes we face unforeseen circumstances such as losing our mental wellness because we are so connected with these grassroots women that so many questions that they need answers to. And we are there to provide that voice, but we cannot provide those services. And that gap that is left with we and them creates a whole burden on our mental wellness. So I definitely can resonate. And to come to your question, Julia, thank you very much. I think for the context of Sierra Leone, we've seen the GIWL, and it has shown real figures, change from 12% to over 30%, but there are still opportunities. There's still how could we hold accountable, not only, you know, seeing those figures at the parliamentary level, change at the parliamentary level, but how could we see communities, areas where they've never seen a woman paramount chief? This GIWL creates that space for a woman paramount chief to see political parties being held accountable, not only providing, you know, having the GIWL at parliamentary level, but to see a woman secretary general in some of these political parties, to see a woman being a treasurer, a woman in these key strategic areas where informed decisions are made to shape the participation of women in these areas. So we want to see a more transparent and honest approach from these political parties. And also the issue of capacity. When you look at, you know, providing spaces for women in ensuring that this bill does not only look into, you know, the political participation, but also in terms of job opportunities for women. How could women be in strategic positions? There are so many qualified women. There are so many women, but there is a systemic, barrier that that's been created to minimize the potential of our women in our country. But despite the challenges, we think with continuous support, the next 5 to 10 years, with the full implementation of the GIWL, holding it accountable, the future will definitely see more women cut across from the lower level to the top level. Yeah.
And with the change to 30%, is it too soon to feel a change amongst, girls about the role modelling effect? I mean, presumably when you were growing up and you looked at leadership levels in Sierra Leone, it was sort of wall-to-wall men, whereas a girl growing up in Sierra Leone now is going to see examples of women's leadership, these 30% of women who are in parliamentary positions. Have you felt yet or seen yet that that's excited girls or made them think that there's some potential future opportunities for them that they wouldn't have recognised beforehand because they simply hadn't seen women do it?
Well, I think, interestingly, as a post-war country, the women in Sierra Leone played a critical role in ending the war in Sierra Leone. It was with the mobilization of women activists who stood up against the then Fode Sankoh, despite bullets and guns, were able to march the streets of Freetown and demanded elections before peace. So it's all about ensuring that our kids understand that the power in mobilization. How could we demand, for what we deserve? It is not what they want us to want. It is what we deserve. So it's the power of mobilization and our kids to understand the role of leadership even at that level. And the work that I do at Media Matters for Women is really on how we engage kids, adolescent girls at the schools to understand leadership, to demand, to hold accountable, to understand the GIWL, to know that they too can ask difficult questions and hold accountability. We have what we call the intergenerational dialogue during our 16 days of activism. And we ensure that the paramount chief is seated there. We have our girls' club, our children are there, the community leaders are there. And these kids are well prepared to ask these questions. And sometimes it is not comfortable for the paramount chiefs. But providing that space where they can also share their own perspective on leadership creates a whole difference on how it shapes, the conversation. So I think, continuous support, creating that space for the young generation will definitely demand a huge change in future. Yeah.
And it's interesting that in that you've sort of phrased it as the younger generation, because one of the things that we were reflecting on at the Global Institute for Women's Leadership's event last week that Katharina referred to is in many countries there is a backlash against gender equality moves and programs because the impression has settled, particularly amongst young people, that more for women necessarily means less for men, whereas a more gender equal world would actually, in truth, be better for everyone. And it seems from the way you've just put it, you've got that sort of inclusive approach of working with younger people overall on the gender equality initiatives, but also for them to sort of claim their place in the shaping of their country's future.
Absolutely. I will share with you a project that we had, which is an FGM project. And what we did, we had boys in the program because we realized that if we're still waiting to ensure that we have a zero tolerance, law on FGM, it will take ages because it's a soft political ground for our politicians. We have NPs who provides funding to initiate hundreds of girls, then, to create a law that will stop FGM. So we had boys in there, and it was the first time to have perspective from boys understanding what FGM was. And the schools were so scared that this is going to bring problem in our communities. Now the boys know and understand what FGM is. They can protect their sisters, their siblings, their friends. And my colleague called me and said, Florence, he said this program is going to lead us into problem. I'm like, why? He said, because even the teachers are scared that the boys are now understanding what FGM is. So I'm bringing that story just to tell you that sometimes we think the men, the boys, know it all, and we shape our programs, to put a blame on them. Not until we have them to understand the real stories and know that this is what is going on with a woman who's been circumcised. And now we are hearing and seeing boys championing FGM, sharing their voices. Same as the Period Power Project. We have boys who are doing the reusable parts, who are sending gifts for their sisters, understanding what period is, understanding there is a whole cultural, cover about women's issues, menstrual health, but we realize that engaging boys and men is the whole power of shifting the narratives.
And Katharina, you might want to respond to some of that, but I also wanted to seek your perspective on, positive or negative, where you are on the next 5 to 10 years. I mean, Florence can obviously see the potential for change in Sierra Leone, but you've told us that we've got a more than 60% cutback, and that's got to tell in less activity, less support. So how are you seeing the next 5 to 10 years?
Good question.
Yeah.
It depends on the morning and how bad I feel when I get up. Doom scrolling I started with.
Right. How many coffees?
Yeah.
All of that.
I think it's both, isn't it? So I think that on the one hand, it is a difficult moment, and I think we would be a bit silly if we didn't kind of recognise that. So there is a huge backlash against gender equality, against women's rights. I think sometimes women are invited into politics in a kind of way that's a bit symbolic. And you talked about the GIWL, Florence, and the importance of quotas, which I agree, absolutely important. But I want to give you a little anecdote from Switzerland. I'm also Swiss, more recently than I am Australian, but the accent's going to be there forever. I don't know if you know, but in Switzerland, the men very kindly gave us the vote in 1971. Oh, kind. At the federal level, which meant that Switzerland was a lot later at getting women into parliament. And in around 2016, 2017, a scrappy little group of feminists called Alliance F created a campaign to get more women into federal parliament. And it was a dramatic success. 42% of women in 2019 were elected into federal parliament. And immediately after that, this lady knows, there was like a drastic decline. And when we asked what happened, exactly what you just talked about and exactly what's in the report, the way that they were treated in Parliament, the way that they were treated by the media, they probably would share your views, they just said, we don't want to stay, right? We're not going to stay in that situation. So I think my point is it's great to have, if we don't want that kind of representation to just be for a short time and to just be kind of tokenistic, we need to have other things. So you have the quota to get women in, and then you need other things that protect them once they're in there, like continued funding for their campaigning. This other idea, again, Caitlin said at this, sorry if you weren't watching, but this great panel last week, she said, you know, women are really good at you go girl. We have to be able to champion women politicians with positive energy and messages that drowns out the bots and the negative. And I don't think we're quite there yet. So I think it's not just getting in that's important, it's how do we stay in. So I think that is one of the challenges and one of the opportunities. I think that there's also this thing where if women in Parliament talk about women, that's called divisive gender politics. So we have to also, you said it too, take the narrative back. Otherwise, we're going to get swamped by all that negativism. Again, funding cuts, when parties have, you know, difficulty raising funds, the first candidates that lose their funding are the women. So again, I think that's another challenge. And then let's not even get started on rising authoritarianism and how we're kind of like, let's kick the dog first, that's us. I mean, I won't go into that because I think that's so, there's so much of that. But I think the opportunities are really the more important piece. And I think that Florence, as you can tell, is an optimist, and women like her are really good at seeing the opportunities, and I think we can take our lead from that. So I would say one opportunity is localisation. Have you heard a lot of talk about that? In the humanitarian world for the last 20 years, they've been talking about localisation, moving what we've just talked about, decision-making to the front lines. How do we, now's the moment, if you're a frontline organisation, where funders are looking for really big returns for small amounts of money, that's it. Put your hand up, Florence, because those are the people, those are the organisations that are going to give donors, bilaterals, governments, better outcomes and impact for smaller money, because women, we don't cost as much. I mean, we should, but we don't. So that's the way that to respond to that localisation opportunity. I think another opportunity is new forms of organising. When I was a kid, I went and protested on Grenham Common.
Oh yeah.
Right, and it was fun, really. But so that's how you did activism. But now there's all these other brilliant mechanisms like digital activism and online platforms and the use of artivism as activism. We didn't do that. That's super cool. Mutual aid networks. These are all things that didn't exist before, and I think we should really take advantage of that, because I think they're new ways of getting the message out and being active. And I think the other thing that's really critical that we haven't been great at is really intersectional alliances. And by that I mean we aren't all one thing, are we? And the way I think to bolster and increase our impact as feminists and women's rights is to really start to work more closely with some of the other movements, climate activists, economic justice, racial justice. We should be inside those movements too, part of those movements too, and influencing them so that our voice is kind of expanded and amplified by all of the movements that we're in collectively, recognising that we're all going to create change for all of us if we do it together.
Thank you. Oh, that's great. I'm going to open up for questions from you now. So we've got some microphones that will come round. So if you can just give me a big wave, because I'm sort of looking into the light. So yes, but the first question just here. So just here on the outside second row. Yeah, it'd be easier to go around that way. Great. Just coming up behind you with the mic.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That was indeed very insightful and very interesting. But I want to applaud Florence. And my name is Alima Tudimonikeni, MBE. I am an activist from Sierra Leone, but obviously based in the UK. I'm an FGM survivor who has led the campaign, not just in the UK, but globally. And I have worked with Florence. She's my go-to person. And I want to applaud her because some of the things she said, I don't think she's gone into great details in terms of risks she has taken to talk to women like myself. And often you are in a dark world when it comes to Sierra Leone and the fight on FGM. And I am so glad that you mentioned it. In the case of Sierra Leone, no amount of funding you provide to women like Florence will ever get to Florence, especially if she's fighting issues like FGM, women's leadership in media, because these two areas are areas that are often sort of polarized, and women are hardly seen or entertained in anything you want to say, because you're directly, by implication, you're directly affecting the political status quo. So there's no way you could speak. But in the case of Florence, what she has done is given us activists, as much as my work is predominantly in the UK, but I have a social impact in Sierra Leone. I self-fund because, again, it's better for us to use our money to fight the systems to correct what is going wrong in terms of women's leadership. The only way I could exert my power and make that change is if I use my own money, similar to what Florence has done. And it's not fair because, again, it's our passion, it's our commitment. For some of us, it's personal. But we don't have to use our means because we have leaders that would put the stumbling block. So to achieve what Florence and many like her in Sierra Leone has done, not only have they taken greater risk, personal risk, but also career risk, professional risk. The mayor is not here because something would tell me she probably is prevented from coming here because she's going to talk about some of those challenges. There are women in prison arrested as we speak because they spoke on issues affecting leadership. So it's great honor as a Sierra Leonean British to see that the work you've done and this report just highlight some of the things that we could not address in terms of women's leadership, because I see myself as a leader. And without the help that you've given myself, the Not in My Name, the Girl at a Time, so many organizations would not do what we do in Sierra Leone so easily without you stretching your arms, which is what you said. We need to help activists like Florence, you know, on the grassroots, the front line. Often we are not seen, nobody hears us, because like you said, the big donors go to big organizations, and often those organizations are headed by the very political change that we want to see. I mean, I don't want to call names. I don't have money to go to court. But there's an individual where every money goes to address the issue of gender-based violence. But yet this individual never, ever mentioned FGM, which is the root cause, even with the political situation in Syria. You cannot be a female MP if you haven't caught a girl. It's as easy as that, and sorry to be a very graphic. but it's what it is. You cannot be a female chief if you have not caught a girl. And we have campaigned last year, I raised up to 500,000 people worldwide joined my campaign to call on the government and the president, for that matter, to insert a law in the Child Rights Act banning FGM. Totally ignored. So thank you for allowing us that.
Thank you. We can take that as an accolade for Florence, which definitely is. We've got another question here. Thank you. Yes, with the microphone.
Thank you so much. It's awe-inspiring, really, all the work that you all do. My question is, I guess, based on that last lady's incredible story, how do you get the government to put in place quotas, like 30%, when clearly they are not interested in women's leadership, they're not interested in ending FGM? So how do you get that buy-in to actually get a quota like that put in?
Yes. How did you get there?
Thank you very much. It took us a lot of engagement. It took the women of Sierra Leone, to mobilize, to engage, and to come up with position papers that we needed the 30% quota. Because we have the numbers, we are 52%. And I think that is the ball that we have as women. We have the numbers. We have women mentors. Women have started this, this work years back. So we were able to engage with the president, we were able to engage with donor partners that we needed to start from the quota level. And we've seen the change that it has brought from 12% to over 30%. And, definitely we appreciate those figures, but we also know that there are other gray areas when it comes to leadership at that level. And I think in terms of sustainability, ensuring that that shift takes place, if we start from the local level where women participate through just the 30% quota, the next 10 years will have a huge shift, and that will shape some of these issues that my sister mentioned on tradition and culture. We'll be able to ensure that despite political, using politics, but we have the numbers to reform some of these laws that are affecting our girls.
Thank you. And there was a question just a few rows in front. Yes, thank you.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much for all the amazing work that you're doing. My name's Lisa Armstrong, and my question is around how the private sector can help fill this aid vacuum beyond just their standard environmental, social governance compliance criteria. Sort of what can happen, or what impact or what influence can be applied to private sector companies to get them more involved in what's happening with the communities, or in initiatives like yours beyond their standard remit.
Thank you very much. I think my organization, Media Matters for Women, have really have a very good relationship with some private sectors. And one is one of the mobile companies in Sierra Leone, which is AfriCell. And through AfriCell, we are able to ensure that our 80 field staff are provided with internet facilities to document stories and share to the team in Freetown, wherein we are able, to see the work that they're doing at that community level. And also, we have this very interesting program called Mami and Omo. This is a very interesting soap opera wherein we share everyday life issue. And it is a way of also, getting, it's two character program wherein a local woman who her lifestyle is in the market, and a teacher, and they talk on so many issues. So these particular programs, we're looking for sponsorships in terms of how we could expand, because it talks on civic matters, it talks on women's issues, and these are issues wherein some people may not dare to speak about it. I remember once we spoke about some sensitive issues, and the opposition then in Parliament referenced Mami and Omo. So I was like, oh my goodness. But that's how, that program is so rich and people resonate with it. So now is a time that people want to listen to stories, listen to their radio, but have a good laugh, because it's funny, but it speaks with the real issues. So, we look into how we have partnerships, sponsorships in such programs.
Can I add
Yes,
something?
yes,
If you get a chance, do listen to Mami and Omo. They're really hilarious and absolutely wonderful. But that's an aside. I wanted to just briefly mention or respond to your point. I think one of the things about women's rights organisation is there's this tendency to look in the same wells, and like as I mentioned, they're drying up. And we operate from this space of scarcity, and it's actually not true. Last year I went to a gala. I've never been to one, so I'm not that person. And I didn't know anyone, 250 people in a room, and it was a fundraiser for an organisation that was started by somebody from the finance world. And over dinner, in 12 and a half minutes, 250 people raised £23 million. Okay, I come from a world where nobody has 23 million pounds. So what it said to me was, we have to expand how we think of partnership. We have to expand how we think of funding. In the women's rights world, we have a very clear view: capitalism bad, us good. Okay, capitalism may be bad, we are good. But that's the system that we have. And if we aren't going to engage in it, we still have to do this critical work, and we still have to find ways to access that funding. And so maybe now is an opportunity for us to learn to think about funding differently and start to be part of the finance world. Mm-hmm. So rather than thinking just about how do we bring money to our organisation, how do we as women start to influence the finance world with a feminist perspective, and thereby start to shift where the money starts to circulate to?
We've got a few more questions, and I'm conscious time's growing short, so I might take the two this side and the two this side, and then we'll get two here and then a response, and two there and get a response. So please, and then coming forward to you, sir.
Okay. Hi. My name's Anita, and I'm only here today because I went to the Caitlin Moran thing that you were talking about last week. So I have one comment to Catherine and two questions for Florence, which kind of lead into each other very quick. So I work with an organisation called Centenary Action, which is convened by Helen Pankhurst, who's Emmeline Pankhurst's granddaughter. So when you say they got the vote in Switzerland in 1971, I know that the vote to all women was got in 1928, so that's really quite startling. So I just wanted to say that. And then I had a question for Florence. When you say you involve the boys in the FGM educational sort of classes, how old are they? How old, or what age group are the boys that are involved? Mm-hmm. And then the second question, and I think the answer is probably to clone you, but how do you, when you talk about the mental toll on the women that are working on the sort of the front line, you know, because even just doing what I do, like from the comfort of my home, you have days when things are so heavy and then days when you can't actually get up. So how are you managing to satisfy that gap that you talked about in people's mental wellness and their mental health?
Okay, so just we'll hold that thought for a second and we'll get this question here from just this second row. Thank you. Here we go. Perfect.
I just want to talk about the thing about the private sector.
Sure.
I work. I've spent my working life working with ethical trade, fair trade organizations, and very much getting them not just to raise finance for this work, but to actually look at the women in their supply chain and how they're doing. In my very early days, I worked with Anita Roddick, and that was her main tenet, that these people are supplying me and they're women, but I'm only hearing from men. So we had to spend a lot of time making sure the women were present to the business. And we've created formats for businesses to talk about how they're supporting women in their supply chain. But like everything else you have said, is the practice is really, really difficult. So I'm not saying this exists in a way that is working as effectively as it could. But it is another way, as you say, to look at the funding environment, to make it important to these businesses that they're recognizing the role women play in their supply, in their success, because that's usually lost.
Yeah.
And so, but it's a real battle, which brings me to my second point I want to put as a question to you. In Sierra Leone in particular, I know, because of the family I come from, women in Sierra Leone have historically built that country, but we have no stories about them. So the girls don't know those women. I can reel off quite a few of you because I was taught from my childhood about these amazing women, some of whom were from my family, who were building the nursing system in Sierra Leone because they studied here and they went back and they did it. Women lawyers representing the country outside in the 50s. And we don't know those stories. Our girls don't know those stories. Our boys don't know those stories. And I think there's a piece of work for us to do to tell those stories as well, because it's not the first time women like you and others are doing this thing. And equally, I wanted to ask how we can extend this globally, because a lot of the power, even when it lies with some women, is global. It's not, and it affects how Sierra Leone is looked at. And why I ask that, I, for my sins, went public about the one woman chief out of 8 that we work with, who I called the best, one of the best CEOs I've ever come across because of the way she runs her village. A woman from the American embassy in Guinea went to that village to try and prove me a liar because there could be no such woman in Sierra Leone. And of course she failed. When she met this chief, she was very impressed by her as well. But what I'm saying is we are not telling the stories of the achievements of women, both historically and currently. Because what I've found in my other work in East Africa, Rwanda and so on, is when they think there's a mass movement of women leaders, and they only think that because we tell the stories, then there's more likely to manage some of the risk, not all of it, some of the risks you're talking about. If they have to get rid of more than one, then it's a little bit more difficult. So I do think there's an important aspect on the media points you mentioned. How do we, all of us, make that those women's stories, including the individual women and their organizations and so on, how can we help make that real?
Okay, thank you. So you've got a few questions there, so we'll get to give you an opportunity to do the answer, and then I'll come out for the last 2 questions.
So thank you very much. For us, our programs looks at, adolescent age from age 16 within school. And so these boys are within age 16. And how do we do it in terms of, safeguarding our mental health? I have to be really honest, sometimes it's hard. As a mother, as a woman, as a journalist, as an activist, when I listen to stories and I can't provide answers, it's hard. I remember waking up one Saturday morning and I heard from one of my journalists, Auntie Florence, there is a girl who has been raped and she's been abandoned, and the family, her own family, cannot even protect her. She was woken up at 4 a.m. to drive birds in this farm, and she was raped. I saw the pictures. I wept. I looked at my young daughter, under 10, and I just imagined she could have been in that same position. All I had to do was use the little connection I had to take her to the safest place and for her to be provided with the appropriate medical response. We have a whole district of thousands of girls without no safe homes, and we operate in those communities. Sometimes even ambulance service to take these girls to these facilities are difficult. You have to go extra mile. Sometimes it's so hard. But despite all of that, when we see a girl, I remember a few months ago, I was called by one of our girls that they galvanized. They stood up for one of their colleagues who was taken for early marriage. And they said, no, with the information we are having, with the work that Media Matters for Women is doing with us, we are going to ensure that they bring that girl. It was a cross-country event. They took her from one district to a cross-country district. We had to call. I called the minister, I called the director, and we were able to get that girl back, and she continued with her school, and we were able to get the parents understand that there is a law that prevents child marriage. So those stories supersedes the ugly stories, having those success stories. But we definitely understand that sometimes we have to look after ourselves. Our journalists are key. Our field staff, who are the key focal points at these communities, sometimes they break down. So part of what we are doing this year is to ensure that we have one of our great coaches and mentors, who's called Hope Chigudu, to be flown to Sierra Leone to have a session with our team, to talk about mental wellness and how we could safeguard ourselves. She tells me, Florence, you look after so many people. Don't forget to look after yourself. Thank you.
And just this question.
Yes,
Story
and quite an interesting. Definitely, the people like Madam Ella Kobolo Gulama, to name a few, have laid the foundation that some of us are working on today. And so we definitely, it is important to document those stories, and also to tell this young generation about the work that have been done. And in terms of what we do, our work relates to the last mile communities. And even within that space, we ensure that we document. We have what we call our women awardees. I remember when we celebrated 10 years, we brought one of them to Freetown to share our experience. And she was looking along the seaside, looking at the building, so amazed. Said, oh, Auntie Florence, I never knew protecting women and girls would bring me this far. I've never been to Freetown. Look how beautiful the sea is. These are the ways, we encourage these women. They are our champions, and we ensure that we provide them with such recognition, even within their communities. And it will interest you to know that our awardees can now even pick up jobs such as community advocates. They work with other organizations in terms of expanding the work on protecting women and girls. in communities where there are no safe homes, some of these women, they leave their beds to protect girls who are being raped, who are being assaulted, and ensure that they use their phones. They walk miles to ensure these girls are provided with the appropriate services.
Yeah, we had two questions here. One here, I thought I saw, and we'll just take one there, and we'll have to draw it there. So, this lady here.
Hello,
Yes,
good
and quick question,
quick.
please.
Yeah. So, hi, good evening. My name is Fia Fasiluku. So, I'm a British-born Sierra Leonean from the ruling house of Sando Chiefdom in Kono. And I just want to know, what is it that we can do, like the younger generation, older generation of Sierra Leonean diasporans, in terms of supporting your work? Because we know they have, political parties have their chapters in London, they raise money for their political parties. Yes, they do.
Yeah.
But in terms of causes that are really close to our heart, that are really meaningful, we have people like my mentor, Miss Alimatu, that are struggling to get funds, but people are still being able to fund political agendas for their parties.
Okay, thank you. And just last question here, please.
Hello all. First of all, thank you for being with us tonight and the brilliant work you do. I'm Demir. I'm the student representative here tonight. I'm a final year business management student and also the student member of the Business Schools Advisory Council. So thank you again. My question will be about the involvement of men and boys in your causes, because I've had the privilege of attending the previous event as well, where the guests talked at length about the importance of building men's networks and use those as a tool, as a driver of change, of positive change in their communities. But it was much more Western and UK focused, that conversation. So I just want to ask, from your perspective and the perspective of your networks, your communities, how do you mobilize young men and boys from such young ages that you've mentioned, when their own families and teachers are teaching them to not stand up or teaching them to stay silent? How does that whole process work? And also, I'm just curious on hearing whether you've achieved something out of those boys who have already been participants in your programs and how you track their involvement afterwards.
Okay, two great last questions.
Thank you.
So
Thank you very
Florence,
much.
thank you.
I will start with the last question in terms of engaging boys and girls. I will share with you a story from Kono district. We used to engage paramount chiefs on maternal and child health issue. We had the worst figures on, maternal mortality. And this chief had 2 wives. Both of them have given birth to girls, and he wanted an inheritance. But he has never, and all the kids on both wives were cesarean section. And he still wanted a male child. And so we had this stakeholders meeting, talking about engagement, the role of chiefs in terms of ensuring that, women within their 36 weeks, go to safe healthcare facilities. And then we had a short film on cesarean section. So we played that movie, and that was the first time the chief saw what his wives have gone through in giving birth to the kids that he had. And after watching the movie, he raised his hand up and said, "Today I've realized that my wives have gone through the most difficult process to give birth to my kids. Now I'm openly going to apologize to them. I've never understood what it meant." And that changed that man's perspective. He went to that room as a stakeholder. After the meeting, he became a champion on maternal and child health issues. So it's about expanding the space to men and boys. And during our FGM program, during our period pad project, we had boys. It is so difficult for even girls to speak about their period with their parents, even their mothers. It is a taboo. It's something that it's so hard. You have to learn by yourself. You have to read if you have the opportunity. So when we have boys now talking about, creating the period power, sewing, providing gifts, understanding what it meant, it has really changed the narrative. In fact, we have a boy who had the best pad in Bombali, and he's using that skill to sell the reusable pad to have, to look after himself and his sisters. So I think, I'm just sharing these stories to tell you how powerful it changes the mindset of people when you allow them, when you engage men and boys. And to answer to your question from the diaspora, I think the diaspora community is really very important when it comes to supporting the work that we do. It could be technical support. It could be internship. It can be, coming with us to join hands. Like now, one of our, vision is to partner in Kono, because it is a diamond ferrous community. It has a lot of issues when it comes to gender-based violence. How can we work in those areas? It could be financial support. It could be using the Period Power Project. So I see a lot of opportunities in terms of working with the diaspora community. Definitely, I know they have the political wings, but we are not interested in that area. We are interested in how we create change in our communities.
Thank you. Well, our time now is coming to an end. Can I ask you to join me in the following things? Number one, in thanking the Oak Foundation for the support that they've given us. Number two, in thanking Katharina for her contribution tonight and for everything that she continues to do for feminist causes right around the world. Thank you very much. Definitely still claiming you as an Australian, definitely. And can I particularly ask you to join me in thanking Florence for everything that she has done and continues to do in the world for this very important piece of research and for sharing her thoughts and that research with us tonight. Thank you so much, Florence.